competition and cooperation have marked India-China relations. The two Asian neighbors joined hands on the issue of climate change, but differences remain on some issues, including Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. WION's Ramesh Ramachandran gets you a closer look.
At the 15th Russia-India-China foreign ministers meeting, which concluded in New Delhi on Monday, both China and Russia hoped India will reconsider its opposition to Xi Jinping's flagship project, the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi broached the issue during his bilateral talks with Sushma Swaraj of India. And Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia, as if on cue, said it needs to be explored. So, will India relent? But more importantly, can it? Jury is still out on that one. India says connectivity initiatives such as Belt and Road must be based on international norms. They should not create unsustainable debt burdens. They must balance environmental concerns, show transparency in project cost assessment, ensure transfer of skills and technology, and respect sovereignty and territorial integrity. Most of India's neighbors except Bhutan have jumped on the bandwagon. India boycotted the inaugural Belt and Road Forum hosted by Beijing in May this year because the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, which is an offshoot of Belt and Road, passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which India says belongs to it. Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China claims Belt and Road will open a new pathway for rebalancing globalization by combining, I quote, economic factors and developmental resources from wider areas following an approach of pursuing shared benefits through consultation and collaboration. Beijing also claims visible economic progress in the 4 years since Xi Jinping first proposed a Silk Road economic belt and 21st century maritime Silk Road. It has resulted in $50 billion investments by Chinese businesses. Pacts have been signed with 80 countries and organizations. 75 overseas economic and trade cooperation zones have been built in 24 countries. And it helped create 200,000 jobs in the countries along the Belt and Road. Before he landed in New Delhi for the trilateral meeting, Wang spoke at a symposium in China about how India and China's need for cooperation outweighs partial frictions between them. He said, and again I quote, "We believe that as long as we continue to engage in in-depth strategic communication and promptly dispel strategic misgivings, the strategic value of China-India cooperation will speak for itself, and there'll be a prospect of the dragon and the elephant dancing together, and 1 + 1 = 11 effect, as expected by our leaders," unquote. But India's opposition to Belt and Road, coupled with its handling of the Doklam standoff, have made some countries look at India as a linchpin of a new security architecture to counter China's aggressive moves in the Indo-Pacific. Most recently, Washington pitched the Trump-Modi meeting on the margins of the East Asia Summit in Manila as an effort to prop up India's military capabilities. The White House said, and I quote, "Two of the world's greatest democracies should also have the world's greatest militaries." Trump is not alone. Obama made India a major defense partner in 2016. That was the year when Prime Minister Modi said that the India-US relationship has, quote-unquote, overcome the hesitations of history. In 2012, the then US Defense Minister Leon Panetta described India as a linchpin of America's strategy in Asia. And going further back to 2005, the then US Foreign Minister Condoleezza Rice said Washington was ready to help India become a major world power in the 21st century. Whether New Delhi will take up on Washington's offer is not clear. Ramesh Ramachandran, WION.
Let's broaden that up for our viewers and take a look at the finer print. Professor Swarant Singh, professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, is joining us in the studio. Also joined in by Atul Aneja, who is the China correspondent with The Hindu. Coming to you first, Professor, that image or the prospect of the dragon and the elephant dancing together, as that report just outlined, Wang Yi imagines that even before the RIC meeting began, even before he landed yesterday. To your mind, that might be far-fetched, but in the circumstances that India is faced with and the feelers that have been sent by both Russia and China yesterday during that RIC meeting over the Obor initiative or the Belt and Road initiative, do you see India relenting?
I think India may relent over a period of time, but this is going to be primarily driven by multiple compulsions that China has. India drifting close towards United States is something that makes them very uncomfortable. Plus, the commercial viability of these mega projects in smaller countries around India requires India's participation to make it economically viable. Then, of course, the question of political legitimacy of these mega projects in India's neighborhood. So China has enormous, serious compulsions to engage and cultivate India to be part of it. Of course, India, in principle, believes in connectivity being a good thing. India is also trying to launch several initiatives along with other countries. For example, with Japan, we have Asia-Africa Economic Corridor, growth Corridor. With Russia, we have another North-South Transport Corridor. So we are not averse to having corridors in principle. We have difficulty with Chinese because they have started something called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which they describe as a flagship, yes. And that's fundamentally the question which puts India in a certain distance. So we have been distancing ourselves in principle. Also the fact that these are all older projects that Chinese unilaterally have decided to put under one reference point called BRI without consulting others. So in principle, India is distancing, but in practice, we are part of several initiatives, and ultimately, we will become part of several of these initiatives, depending on what is in it for us.
Mr. Aneja, India is increasingly being looked at by other countries as a linchpin when it comes to changing the discourse and the geopolitical situation in the Indo-Pacific region. How has China reacted to that role so far, and how has the media so far reacted to the RIC meeting, which concluded yesterday?
Well, there are these two things. One is regarding the Quad, this supposedly a politico-military arrangement between Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. Now, of course, the Chinese media has not reacted well. Even the foreign ministry has expressed its reservations. Personally, I do think that it is not a great idea, because if you look in terms of geographical proximity to China, we are the only country which has a land border with China. The Australians are further away, the Japanese are further away, and the US is further away. I do not think that becoming a front line in arrangement for the containment of China serves India's national interests.
Okay.
And therefore, if we have to balance China, see, there are two things. One is that you want a cooperative relation with China, but you want to do it realistically. And to add realism to it,
all right,
you have to balance China. Balancing is one thing. I can see the merit is one thing. But to get into a containment strategy,
that's the other aspect. Absolutely. Just hold that thought there, please. Mr. Aneja, just hold that thought there. Some breaking developments coming in right this minute and related developments. China has now halted 3 key projects under its China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It is learned Beijing will revise the financial mechanism when it comes to that project. It's a big jolt indeed for Pakistan. Let me quickly go straight across to our senior correspondent, Ramesh Ramachandran, who's standing by with further details. Ramesh, what more do we know at this point, and what reasons have been ascribed for those projects being halted?
Molly, this is the news being covered by a section of the Pakistani media that the Chinese government has indicated that they will stop the funding of 3 key road projects as part of the CPEC, or the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And the reasons given by the Chinese or the Pakistanis are that they will review the financial mechanism or the modes of payment and repayment for the projects under the $60-odd billion CPEC project. The Pakistani media is also reporting that quoting the Minister of Planning, Ehsan Iqbal, as telling a parliamentary committee that China is reviewing the financial aspects and has scrapped the old financial mechanism and is waiting for a sanction of the new mechanism before they get on with these 3 road projects as part of the CPEC project.
The implications of this, Ramesh, before I get in further perspectives from Mr. Aneja and Professor Singh. The implications of this, Ramesh.
Well, Molly, this, on the face of it, it seems to indicate a rethink on the part of China, but that would be too premature to argue for at the moment, given the so-called all-weather relationship that exists between China and Pakistan. CPEC is an offshoot of the Belt and Road, and I don't think a flagship project of this nature, which carries the signature of Xi Jinping, finances will come in the way of implementing that project. But the reasons are more to do with domestic compulsions within Pakistan, especially given reports of corruption in the execution of some of these projects. So it is more to do with domestic politics than strategic reasons. Molly?
Professor, your thoughts?
I think we shouldn't worry too much about a couple of projects being in difficulty.
Why is that?
Because similar experience has happened across Africa. There are several projects which have been stopped, which have been not agreeable to African leaders. The bigger reality is that China is continuously working on several of the other projects, which are, for example, Gwadar is the biggest example of all this. And some of these projects, as they develop, will develop some problems in terms of pricing, in terms of repayment timing, and other stakeholders will have some questions on how these have become viable, etc., etc. The sale price of per unit, for example, electricity being produced, and those nitty-gritties will go on, and I'm sure they'll find some solutions. Reality is that more and more countries are getting interested in CPEC, Central Asian nations, Russia now.
But it's a big jolt indeed for Pakistan. I want to bring in Mr. Aneja on that front. How do you read these 3 projects being halted? We're looking at a corruption scandal in a way hitting that project.
No, I don't think we should miss the wood for the trees. I mean, these are kind of problems which will come in, but the relationship between China and Pakistan anchored through CPEC is a strategic relationship. And I agree with the point which Ramesh made, that this is strategic. And you're going to have hiccups, the point which Professor Soren was making. So I do not see the big picture in any way getting altered. CPEC is just too important for China and Pakistan, and other countries are also getting interested. I think India has to understand that you cannot reverse this. Now, would you want this to veto your relationship with China is something which our policymakers have to take into consideration. But it is happening. And I don't think these kind of hiccups are going to interrupt the overall flow of the relationship and of the project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, I mean.
Ramesh, beyond these being hiccups, these are not the first time these indicators, all right, we've lost that line with Ramesh. This is not the first time that these implications of the project hitting a roadblock are coming in. But as Mr. Aneja is pointing out, not too much weight to be given to these financial mechanism implications that China is talking about?
These are issues at the brass tacks level.
Right.
And they happen in most projects, even in the best relationships. Between India and the United States, for example, we have the nuclear civil liability bill constantly being questioned. So at that level, in all such contracts, issues arise and they will be resolved over a period of time. But the bigger issue is that Chinese are looking at it as a strategic investment. And they are openly asking India, and I think you saw this time Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov batting for Chinese. It was almost patronizing to say that Indian diplomats must be smart enough to protect your interest and engage.
Right.
So our best friend Russia is today wanting us to join CPEC and BRI, etc., etc. And I think it's time that we need to answer these repeated offers, so to say, from China, from Pakistan, and now from Russia, that India should come and engage. Whereas on the ground, we are engaged. I mean, this April only we had a meeting.
Mr. Aneja said earlier, before we got these breaking developments, the point that we were trying to make of India emerging as a linchpin when it comes to the situation in the Indo-Pacific region. It's not in India's interest, is what Mr. Aneja is saying. But at the same time, do you think India is prepared for that role?
See, India now follows a policy of multi-alignments. So entering Quad is no way in contradiction in terms of having a relationship with Russia, China and India triangle. India is a heavyweight player in the region. It's the largest neighbor of China. So obviously we have to begin to negotiate what is in it for us, rather than simply saying we are abstending ourselves or we are distancing ourselves, we are sort of not participating in any of these things, whereas I am saying in reality we are participating in several initiatives. BCIM Economic Corridor, this April only we had consultations in April. In May we absented from May summit in Beijing. We are part of AIIB, which is Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We are the second largest stakeholder, which is supposed to finance these activities. We are part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which praises and endorses BRI. We sit on these bodies. So in reality, we are part of several of these activities, which Chinese have unilaterally declared to be BRI. We need to ask them questions as to why they did not consult India in time or other stakeholders in time. If they now want us to come in, then what is for us in it?
We're going to have to wrap this up. We're completely running out of time. Mr. Aneja and Professor Singh, appreciate both of you joining us on the broadcast.